I was 30 years old when this started, and now I'm 61. It seems like a blink of an eye to me, but for them it had to have been just excruciating. I was sort of expecting a very large, thuggish teenager with a bad haircut. When we got into the cell for our first meeting, there sat this child. He looked like he was about 10 years old. They didn't have a jail uniform big enough for him. He had to roll up his pant legs and sleeves just to be able to expose his hands and feet. He never could provide us with a narrative that was consistent, and that really bothered me. And of course, there were things in the transcription of the interrogation that the West Memphis police did that were not just discrepancies, but huge impossibilities. For example, he said that the 3 8-year-olds had skipped school that day, and as did Jason Baldwin, but that's not true. They were all 4 in school that day. It was definitely a rush to judgment, and they immediately set their sights on Mr. Echols because he was different from everybody else in West Memphis. He listened to Ozzy Osbourne and Metallica, and he wore black even in this part of the country. And this time of year when it's 100 degrees, people actually believed here in the Mid-South, in the Bible Belt, that there is such a thing as the devil, who is out there roaming around and inflicting evil on people's lives. And here, locally in 1993, people actually believed there was such a thing as satanic cults roaming the woods in West Memphis. One of the great ironies of the case is this happened almost exactly 300 years to the day from the Salem witch trials. That was another mass hysteria event. That created the perfect storm, and with the misinterpretation of the autopsy by the police, they were actually stuck with what they had, because even though they later learned that there's no such thing as satanic ritual homicide, that's the cards they had to play. And so they did anything and everything to persuade and coerce people to testify falsely. They hid out witnesses, all kinds of stuff. He was told that if he just told the cops what they wanted to hear, that he could go home and see his dad. But he had no advocate in the room. His father wasn't allowed to be in the room. There was no lawyer in the room. There was no videotape from beginning to end. We have an interrogation that took place over the course of about 12 hours, from 9 a.m. to 8:30 or 9 p.m. They chose to use an audio tape and got about 30 minutes of audio tape. If you read the transcript or listen to the confession, he actually gets so many things not just wrong, but I mean, they're impossibilities. He said they were tied up with a big brown rope, and they weren't. They were tied with their own shoelaces. Jessie, at first glance, does not appear to have any characteristics of being or having MR. And he was not fit for trial. He didn't understand what a lawyer was. He didn't understand what the judge's role was. He didn't know what the jury was for. He just was lost completely. It was, according to one of the lawyers for Mr. Echols, who was the architect of the plea, he called it a win-win because the state gets their conviction and we get to go home. But what he didn't factor in was the fact that these kids are saddled with felony convictions for the rest of their lives. I was talking to Jason Baldwin not too long ago, and he said, Dan, I don't even leave the country anymore because when I do, they see my passport and look at my record and they strip search me and do body cavity searches and x-rays. And he said it's just humiliating and dehumanizing, and so I just don't leave the country anymore. When we did the 2007 DNA testing, there was a hair found in the ligature that bound the victim, Michael Moore, was a partial match to Terry Hobbs. Mr. Hobbs, we can't account for where he was on the evening that the boys disappeared. Terry Hobbs had stated on the record that a fellow by the name of David Jacoby helped him look for little boys, and his hair was definitively found on a tree stump at the crime scene. And I call it a crime scene, but I think it's more likely a dump site than having actually happened at that location. And I say that because of the geography, that particular stretch of road, even though West Memphis is not a very big town, about 10,000 big 18-wheeler trucks pass through West Memphis every day, and the economy in West Memphis is based primarily on the trucking industry. Right next to where the bodies were discovered was a huge parking lot for truck drivers to park their big rigs, and it literally backed up to where the bodies were discovered. I think we may be looking at a serial killer in the form of a over-the-road long-haul truck driver. That's my second theory, and I actually have a suspect in mind that I can prove was in the area a couple of years before the murders. And we still have some unsolved child murders near West Memphis about the same time. It was tough. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, and even though I've never been in combat, I experienced some of the same symptoms that veterans. Unexpected loud noises startled me, and it messed with my sleep patterns, and I had nightmares, and there was no winners and losers in this case. And my wife, the ex-wife, didn't like me and my obsession with the case and my promise that I made to my client to get him out of prison or die trying. She didn't like all the frequent trips I made to meet with experts and talk to witnesses, and so she was very resentful, and we grew apart. And in 2008, on my 45th birthday, we got divorced. And my daughter, who was 15 at the time, had a hard time coping with that. But the kids, all of them supported me. I missed football games and soccer matches, piano recitals, but the kids knew that I was working on something important, and they encouraged me, especially my son Chris, who passed away a few years ago at age 34.